Welcome to everybody who has joined. We'll just give it another couple of minutes, so just 1 minute before 1, to let people finish their other meetings, grab a coffee, grab some lunch, get settled. If while you're doing that, you're able to log on to Slido on the instructions given on the slide, either on the device you're on at the minute or on a different device, and pop in the code that's on the screen. That will get you up and running, ready for the session. Probably feel like I should know the answer to this, but does anybody else who is co-presenting today and hosting know roughly how many people we have coming along and is able to gauge when might be a good time to get going?
I think Liz told me about 40.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Don't know how many people. We'll give it another minute. Then we'll get going.
How much people might read that about Twitter?
Okay, so I think we'll get going because I think people are just starting to drift in and probably grabbing themselves a bite to eat and a drink. So welcome to what is the second of 2 events that are running as part of National Human Learning Systems in Cornwall. I think the first thing I need to remember to let you all know is that this is being recorded. So if anybody feels uncomfortable with that, if you prefer to be off camera, then obviously just change according to what you feel most comfortable with. So it's really lovely to have all of you in the space today. And we're expecting there to be a range of people. Some of you have got no idea what human learning systems is about. Some of you may have touched on the ideas and concepts before. Some of you may be working with it already in other places. Everybody welcome. The idea of this session is really just to give, as we've called it in the title, a very light touch lunch and learn introduction, mainly for people living and working in Cornwall, by people also living and working in Cornwall, to what human learning systems is. And for those of you who have no idea at all, then effectively human learning systems it's really just an approach or a framework or a set of principles that can guide us and help us to thinking about a better way of delivering public service. It very much starts with the complexity of people's lives, and it recognises that people's lives are all complex. We're all different, we're all individuals, we're all human beings, we all have different aspirations, different challenges, different barriers, different hopes. And therefore, if people's lives are complex, then effectively the system in which we all work is also complex. And therefore, perhaps trying to find single solutions to meet people's needs and change people's outcomes in a one particular intervention or one particular solution is perhaps not going to actually change outcomes for people in reality. So what human learning systems helps us to do is embrace all that complexity and messiness of life in all of its glory, and helps us to focus on and understand the things that are within our gift to help us think about people as human beings, the system that actually surrounds each individual, which is complex, and then what we can do to help enable change and enable different outcomes in people's lives and learn and grow as we go along a journey together. It's not a new concept. It's been around for a few years and it's quite well travelled. So it's reached international levels. I've been on calls this week with people from Australia, with people from across Europe. There's also many examples of where people are working in a more human learning systems way in the UK. And this is at many different levels of the system. So it's very, very flexible and very applicable. both on very specific issues that you might be facing in your work or in your challenges, in areas that you work in, right up to examples of where systems are looking at taking this approach. So we have examples of where integrated care systems are looking at taking a more human-led approach to their learning and how they work. There's some examples of local governments who are also interested in this way, and indeed there are examples of governments that are thinking about how they work in a more human learning systems type way. So for today, like I've said, this is effectively being pulled together by people in Cornwall working in this space. So you'll hear from some more speakers other than just me. I'll allow them to introduce themselves more fully when they get to their bit. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ali Wills, and I work for an organisation called Active Cornwall. And together as an organisation, we're looking at how we can embrace human learning systems, approaches and principles across all of our work. Okay, so effectively for the next 45 minutes, we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring with you collectively together how we currently work. And then we're going to take a little bit of time to think about, on the basis of what you've told us, what are the things that help us to work better, both as individually and help us to work better together. We're then going to talk about human learning systems, and we are going to stress that this is just one approach to working better. There are others, but this is the approach that we have felt is most helpful for some of the complex issues that we are working on in Cornwall. It would be really helpful if you've got a piece of paper and a pen to hand in order to be able to do one of the exercises. And if anybody hasn't yet managed to drop onto Slido, it would be really helpful to do that now and pop the code in. As we say, the formal part of this session will aim to wrap up after about 40 to 45 minutes. For any of you who get really interested and really excited and are curious to learn more about human learning systems, then some of the presenters today are happy to stay on until around 2 o'clock to have any further discussions or to answer any more questions that anybody has. Okay, so that's it for introduction. I'm now going to hand over to one of my colleagues, Emma, allow her to introduce herself, and she's going to walk us through a quick Slido poll.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I work in the Drug and Alcohol Action Team in Neighbourhoods in the Council. So if you haven't done so already, go to slido.com and enter the code. And I'm on one screen today, so bear with me whilst I do some IT limbo. You should now be able to vote in this question. So what we're asking is, are you able to make the most positive difference that you can in your role? So in other words, do you feel fully enabled to make the change you want to at work? Simple yes, no. Okay, so we've got that's 3/4 say no, quarter say yes. Looks like everyone has voted. All right, so next question, looking at that digging into that a bit more. So what is stopping you from making the most positive difference you can at work? So what are some of the barriers, challenges that you face in your work when you're trying to make the most positive difference you can? And this is a word cloud kind of exercise. So type in words or phrases and they'll pop up on the screen. And if someone else has already put something similar to what you wanted to say, you can select that answer. They've got technology, silos, leadership, time pressure, wider system barriers, funding. A lot of people have put that. Size of workload, commissioning, leadership again. Poor governance, management, technology, processes. A few people have written. Budget cuts, red tape, lack of priorities, politics, capacity, Yes, we've got funding, leadership, and silos coming through as the big barriers. More collaboration. Cuts. I think everyone has said something. So yeah, we've got leadership, silos, funding as the main barriers. Oh. And then last question, the opposite of that, what helps you make the most positive difference you can in your work? So what are some of the enablers that help you in your work make the positive difference you're seeking to make? Good relationships, trust, teamwork, colleagues, teamwork, quick decisions, conversation. Yeah, good relationships, teamwork, colleagues coming out as strong enablers, trust, working with people, positive expectations. I like that. Empowerment, co-production, learning, thinking space, experience, working with people, embracing innovation. Yeah, we've got good relationships, teamwork, trust, and colleagues as the strongest enablers. Oh, I can see some people are still typing. Lived experience. MDTs, for people who don't know what that means, that is a multidisciplinary team. So yeah, collaboration, getting people working together. Space to try new things safely. Thank you, everyone. That's a really rich overview of what some of your thoughts are. I'm just going to hand back to Ali now. Just got to do some share the PowerPoint again.
Thank you, Emma. We're tech enabled because we've got Emma who help us. So really interesting that 75-25 split, I think I heard, on how enabled we feel as a group, just right here, right now, today, to turn up to work and do the best job that we can do. So that was really interesting, and I think that's probably not unusual in the kind of space that we work in, and just a really richness, I think, of feedback that came through in terms of what some of those barriers are that we all feel like we face on a daily or a weekly basis, and then what the opposite of that is, I guess, which is what some of the enablers are. No great surprise, this question has been asked, many times before and with many different groups, and we had a selection of different content we could have shared with you at this point, but this happens to be one that really resonated with us as a group in Cornwall, which has come from a big piece of work, project programme, a system-wide change that they're looking at doing across Greater Manchester in the space of physical activity, or indeed physical inactivity. And what they found from countless multiple conversations with stakeholders and people from across their system is that they've managed to bucket it into roughly 5 different areas of things or enablers that help both us as individuals to work better and also help us to work more collectively and more collaboratively together, which is at the heart of human learning systems. So some of the language that we might have used might be a bit different and kind of what's surfaced today, but generally what I think was interesting is that there's quite a lot of correlation between what you've said in your Slido answers today and what comes through on here. So I think I had quite a lot, for instance, around poor governance, processes, technology, red tape. So all of that piece there in that bottom right hand box about how important it is to be able to transform our governance and processes to help us work in a more relational, more human way and enable us to do the jobs that we are being asked to do. Kind of links back to leadership, that as well, doesn't it? So I did hear quite a bit around challenges, around leadership, around lack of priorities, and perhaps a little bit about the type of leaders as well in a space, and the kind of leaders that we all would like to be. And at the heart of the work and of human learning systems is also about how we think about enabling others to be leaders, and thinking of as leadership as not something that is owned by leaders, but can be owned by many. and how we enable many of us across all of our work and our system to step into that leadership space. What else did I hear? I heard I heard loads of really good stuff about having positive relationships, good relationships, and trust being at the heart of relationships, teamwork being at the heart of that, colleagues, how important it is to work together. And that is, again, hugely important as part of enablers to helping us all to do better work. So both across and between sectors, so reducing those silos that people talked about that came out in the barriers. I heard some really lovely words around empowerment, around co-production, which again really will talk to that human element of when we go on to talk about the human part of human learning systems, and how do we really start with where people are at, really listen to the people that use our services, the people that live in our communities, involve them in a decision-making process, understand the assets that we have in our communities and how we can support them to grow alongside people in those communities that have a vested interest in changing and transforming their own lives. And then lastly, I heard some really lovely comments made about needing the time within us to reflect, because the time and the capacity to reflect is really important as an enabler to learning and a desire to be more innovative and more creative in what we do. But again, in order to behave like that and to be able to embrace those skills, we need time to be able to learn and to adapt and to think about how we can continue and learn in order to constantly improve what we do. So that was fab. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm there on the poll, and a lot of similarities, I think, between what we're hearing from you in Cornwall and what we're hearing on a national and international level. So I guess one of the big questions then is, how do we then put these enablers into practice? So I think, as I said up front, one approach to what some of us have been trialling across Cornwall is human learning systems. It's not a wholly new approach, and in fact many of the tools and the practices and the ideas and the concepts will be very familiar to lots of people, no doubt, on this call today and in Cornwall as well. But it often feels like we've been talking about these things for a really long time. So holistic approaches, being strength-based, asset-based community development, co-design, co-production. But there often seems to be many, many barriers that get in the way of helping us to actually put these things into practice. So human learning systems is really like I say, it's an approach, it's a set of principles, and it's a way which helps to think about how we can bring all these things together in one space and think about how we work on those more collectively in a more systemic way together to change the outcomes for the people that we most want to support. So that's it for my little bit. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Celia, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, and she's going to talk through in more detail about what the system part of human learning systems means.
Hi, welcome, and those of you that don't know me, I'm Celia Davis and I work in the complex needs team, and we've been looking at human learning systems really as a way to work with services in order to help prove the outcomes for those with multiple vulnerabilities. So, move away from that silo working into sort of much more collaborative work. So I'm defining what the system is, and we're going to do a little activity shortly, but it's just starting to think about what is a system. But more importantly, I think we often use this term quite regularly, but we don't always understand what it means sort of in the term or in the context of our work. And certainly people from outside of externally from what we're doing don't necessarily understand that term. So we just want to sort of delve into it and think about it a little bit more. So we go to the dictionary definition on the screen. It's a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism, or I think the important bit here, or an interconnecting network, a complex whole. It's that interconnecting network, the people that might be part of that network, the organisations that might sit around an individual who they're sort of working alongside. It might be policies, processes, might be cultures, beliefs, stigmas around certain situations. It might be the environment in which people live, which affect, they might be urban, rural, that system that sits around an individual is what creates the outcomes for those individuals that we're sort of working with. And in public services, we're working towards making sure that, you know, we use the term, we want people to live their best lives, or, you know, quite often the term flourishing, make sure people flourish in their lives. And that might be different for every individual, but it's those real outcomes that we're looking at, we're wanting to improve. But they're not delivered just sort of by one service or, you know, one particular intervention or a project that you've put on. We're not going to shift those outcomes unless we start to look at all the different factors that are going to sort of impact on that system. And that system is complex, it's interconnecting, and it's ever changing. And it's those systems which create the outcomes. So in order to create good outcomes, we need to make sure that that system is healthy. And it's a system in which people collaborate and learn together. Okay, we're going to move over to an activity now. So this is why you needed your pen and paper. It's to get you thinking about the system that sits around you as an individual, and how the influences within your system affect the amount of exercise that you do. So the outcome's the amount of exercise. It does not matter whether you do a little or a lot of exercise, but you want to be thinking about that level of exercise for you. It might be, if we just start to have a little think, it might be the people, you know, our parents might have been particularly into exercise or not. It might be that we've got really good friends that drag us along to the gym, keep us motivated. So we do quite a bit of exercise, a bit of a social thing. I think we can all think back to memories of school and education and whether that influenced how much we like PE. Quite often a really good PE teacher, one that was fun, or, you know, I talked about this the other day, pounding the streets, doing cross country on freezing winter days, always sort of is in my memory from school PE. It might be links to your work. You can't get to the gym, you might do late shift, you might work long hours, you might have caring responsibilities. It might be linked to physical or mental health, which affects those levels. It might be the time that swimming, you know, it might be the pools or gyms aren't open at the times that you need to go, or you might not live close, you know, it might be too far. It could be the things around perhaps community safety. If you live in an area where you don't want to be going out because it doesn't feel safe, then that's going to affect, you know, how much exercise you perhaps do. Or you might just not have the self-confidence. You might be anxious about your weight, or, you know, there's so many different areas that might affect the level of physical activity that you do. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes to just think about that level of physical activity that you do. Again, like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if it's a little or a lot. And Emma's kindly put up a few examples on there that you might want to think about. But 3 or 4 minutes to really think about what in your system that sits around you affects your level of activity. And we should have got some really annoying background music for this bit because it was quite quiet on Monday as well, wasn't it, Emma? We forgot to do that. But I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 minutes and then we're going to come back together and just share those. So it's over to you to have a think about your influences in your life. about 30 seconds. And then we'll start popping them into the chat. Okay, right. Can you choose sort of 2 or 3 each of those that you've written down, just 2 or 3 key ones that you think, and just pop them into the chat so we can really start to see some of the key influences on the levels of physical activity that you do. Pop it into the chat and then I'll go zooming through and we can just get an idea of the different things that affect people's level of activity. Brilliant. Yeah. We can already start to see from those coming through, you know, there's a lot around that social aspect of exercise, and that's both ends. Some people are going because it's social, some people have that lack of social or people to be able to go and need that self-motivation of someone there to support them. People in jobs are particularly affect you quite often. We sit at a desk all day, I do it, and we don't tend to get out as much as we possibly could do. Yeah, confidence, you know, being able to, I know one of my colleagues was talking about, actually it was getting to the gym and feeling comfortable in that space, you know, that whole confidence of being in a position where they would turn up. But actually once the gym had put on a women only session, it just gave them that little bit of edge. But what we can see already here definitely is that there is such variety linked to our own systems, you know, and if we go around, you know, we could probably solve one of these areas. So it might be that we could reduce our working life, or we could, you know, find a friend to go to the gym with. It might be cost, you know, cost was mentioned there. We could move next to a gym and be given free passes for the year, but we still wouldn't actually go to the gym if we didn't address the other issues that sit around that. So, you know, instead of mending one area of the system, what we need to do is we need to look at it as a whole. So, you know, it might be mental health, it might be, you know, just motivation. It might be for some, you don't have the right clothing to turn up to the gym, or you can't afford it. Tess was talking about when she was younger, or when her children were younger, she talked about the school putting, or well, it wasn't the school putting a new cycle route, there was a new cycle route put into school. However, it was in a particularly deprived area where they couldn't afford as a family to buy the bikes in order to get to school. You know, it isn't just by solving one aspect that we're going to be able to change the outcomes for individuals. So it's really important that we understand the complexity, and it's not always a straightforward solution. It's not that linear solution. And if we have a look at that, the reality of our working world and the issues of physical activity is complex. Going from A to B is not a straight line. We need to think about the other influences and the other factors which are impacting on that. Just quickly, I mean, obviously in what we did, we just literally had a quick snapshot in 3 or 4 minutes of people writing down all the things that affected their system and the influences on their lives, which have affected their levels of activity. And for some that was less active, some that was more active. But this particular map just shows it's an obesity system map. So there's a lot more sort of research gone into this other than our 4-minute quick snapshot. But what this is looking at is things like the social psychology and individual psychology of someone with obesity there. It's linked to food production, you know, it's marketing, isn't it? It's not just that consumption. It might be linked to past traumas, and food becomes their coping mechanism in that psychological element of it. Again, it's the not perhaps accessing the system or having a different physical or an activity environment that they don't feel comfortable going into. So that's just a sort of really to show you the complexities that sit around some of these outcomes that we're hoping to change. I'm going to hand over to Dulcie now, who's going to talk you through human and learning. So thank you for getting involved with that activity.
Right, thanks, Celia. I'm Dulcie McBride. I am a consultant in public health at Cornwall Council, and I am very into human learning systems, and we've been having a go with it anyway in some of the work that we've been doing in public health. So that's the systems bit, which you can see in front of you, and we are happy to accept that any outcome for each of our own emerges from each of our own complex systems. Then the human, then the human bit is, well, the first is about 3 main concepts. So that first bit is that if each of our outcomes emerges from our system, then our moral purpose as public services is to help people get the best possible outcomes as humans. And that has to be our moral purpose if we're to get the best outcomes. It can't be balancing budgets. It can't be meeting government targets. Our moral purpose is about helping each individual achieve the best possible outcomes. So that's what the first human bit means. The second concept around human is that we're all human. I was thinking we should get T-shirt that says managers are humans too. But we often forget that. We had a conference quite a while ago now, and lots of sort of provider organisations there, and someone was saying, oh, commissioners, they're horrible, they don't understand us, they're just about, you know, setting targets and stuff. And there was a commissioner there, and she got really upset about that, because that's not why she turns up to work. She turns up to work to try and make the best difference possible, because we are all human, we're all trying to do the best job, and we all live, again, in our own complex system of relationships and places and people. And that if we are genuinely going to keep that moral purpose of the best possible outcomes for every individual, we have to treat ourselves as human beings and trust each other and be kind and compassionate to each other to get the best out of ourselves and the people that we work with. So that's point 2. The third concept is that when we're managing public services, we must understand and embrace what we've just said, that each human lives in this complex network of relationships of people and place. And if we're going to understand humans and what gets the best outcomes for them, we have to understand that complex world. And this is the most important bit, embrace that complexity. We shouldn't try and oversimplify it and turn a complex outcome into just one indicator and think that that tells us everything about the system, because clearly it can't. So if we're going to support better outcomes, we have to understand and work with that whole complex system. And that's where the learning bit comes in. So if we accept that outcomes for each individual emerges from our own complex system, and that these complex systems are constantly changing. So it could be at an individual level that our relationship change, we get married or divorced or meet someone, or we finally manage to buy a house and feel more settled, or locally our system changes and a supermarket opens or closes, or a leisure centre opens, or in our case closes. Or nationally, I don't know, maybe we get a new prime minister who in one foul swoop, you know, changes the whole economic landscape. I mean, who knows? All these things are constantly changing. So there can't possibly ever be a quick fix or even a selection of quick fixes that we can put in place and work all the time. We can't just commission a service and think we'll get the outcomes for it. So what do? We have to take a learning approach. We have to be constantly reviewing and learning about the environment that we all live in, what's changing, what's happening, what do we understand about individuals, environments and systems and what's changing there, what do we know about what could work or what should work, what's effective, when and for whom, and that's going to mean trying things out and understanding and learning about what's working, in what circumstances, for whom, why it might be working, and it will mean that we make mistakes and we get things wrong because that's inevitable. And then we have to adapt from what we're learning. And I think the key bit is that we have to be okay and genuinely happy to discuss when things don't work. And certainly I'm in a lot of meetings where that isn't the case. But if we don't say it's okay to get things wrong and be able to talk about things and actually change things, then we will never get the best for the population. And that, as we previously discussed, should be our moral purpose. So we need to create that culture of curiosity and learning if we're genuinely to get the best outcomes for people. Okay, what does that mean in practice? This slide, again, as Ali said, there is so much stuff out there on this, but we picked this one because we think it was a nice summary of some of the things you can do to move away from the barriers that people identified in that poll at the beginning to some of the enablers that also people identified. And actually, there's quite a lot of crossover today of what we said in that poll at the beginning and what's on this slide. So things you can have a go at. We can have a go at moving from, we take those top two, about if you're commissioning a service, instead of putting in your service specification, your contract targets and KPIs and monitoring, which comes from a place of assuming that people are maybe a little bit dodgy and not as trustworthy they could be. So you need to monitor them. Otherwise, who knows what they might do. But actually changing that and saying, actually, let's put in the contract that we're all going to learn together, that we're going to come together on a regular basis and learn about what's working and use a selection of data, not just quantitative number indicators. Moving from the idea that we'll take something that works and then we'll commission it and assume it's going to work here. Actually thinking about, well, how does it work and why does it work and what do we need to do to make sure it works in our place? Now, this is, I was going to say this is my favourite, and by favourite, I kind of mean least favourite. So the thresholds, assessments and prescribed packages, we do this all the time. We go, right, we're going to assess this group of people and see if they've got this issue and see if it's bad enough for them to get what we've decided people get. Firstly, this puts us in the absurd situation of telling people they're not bad enough, and if they just go away and get worse, then come back, then they can have help. But also, it means that we're not actually getting the best outcomes for people. And in the end, it becomes really inefficient and ineffective because you were only treating people when they get really bad. And what we should try and move to is actually when someone asks for help or we identify when someone might need help, what we do is create a relationship with that person and solve where they are when they are. And what might that look like? One, you get better outcomes, and two, in the long run, this becomes much more effective and much more efficient. We often identify a problem and then go, right, we need to buy a solution to fix this problem. And that sometimes works and that can be fine. But actually, in these outcomes we talked about and these complex systems which create these outcomes, we need to go beyond that and think about community solutions and asset-based solutions. We need to move from, and I think a lot of people said silo, didn't they, and competition, setting up our systems for people to compete against each other and putting people under pressure so they work in their little silo and don't talk to them. If systems create outcomes, then we clearly have to work across systems and collaborate because not everyone can do everything and work in partnership to solve a number of aspects of issues in systems and create a better system than just trying to fix one thing by competing against each other to deliver services. And finally, I was reading this morning, just going through it. It says, don't trust anyone and blame everyone. I was like, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? Sure, we're not that bad. And then I thought about my meetings last week and went, maybe that's not quite so harsh. And I thought about the conversations I've had that were based on lack of trust and people trying to blame each other for, really horrible things that happened to some kids. And you can see where it comes from, but it gets us nowhere. So actually, can we try and start with trust and assume that everyone is trying to do a good job, because pretty much everybody is, and have this idea of this positive error culture that we will do things and it won't always work, but that's okay because that's how we learn. So there's some ideas of how you could actually put this into practice. So just to summarize them, human learning system is an approach to managing and delivering public services in a way that should improve outcomes. That's the point. It's not just changing stuff for, a bit of fun. We should get better outcomes, and that's what the evidence tells us if we take this sort of approach. Because it starts with understanding people as human beings, and how we feel and what we do and what we achieve is due to our own individual complex system of relationships, of people, of assets, of services, of places. And we also know that those systems are constantly changing. So if we accept that, and that's the case, then pretending that we can oversimplify this to understand it better and then fix problems by delivering set services that we just monitor by measuring a selection of indicators is clearly nonsense. We have to embrace and understand each person's system and then collectively work across many aspects of those systems, try things out and constantly learn, reflect and adapt. That's human learning systems. So there are a number of groups in Cornwall that are trying to take human learning systems approach to their work. And what we're finding, which is helpful, is this isn't a massive transition. You don't just go, right, this is what we were doing, and we're going to massively change everything and do something completely different, and then we're doing human learning systems. That's not how it's working, thankfully, because that's quite hard. What we're actually finding is it's small steps. It's having a go at some of the ideas we've talked about today. And it's a lot about shifting our perception to start to see systems and what's working well in systems and building on that. And I guess the key bit that we keep coming back to is always working hard to remember that everyone genuinely wants to do a good job and make a difference. That's it. So we hope you've enjoyed that and that it sparked some interest or curiosity at least. That's the formal 45 minutes of us presenting, but there are a few of us that are having a go at this that will stay on till 2 if there are questions or any discussion points, or people just want to have a chat generally about human learning systems. There we go. And if you want more information, there's the link there to the Human Learning Systems website. It's got loads of stuff and ARM emails. If you have a favourite presenter that you'd like to get in touch with and ask more of, or any work that people are doing, just get in touch.